Dr. Samuel Green stands frozen against his Mercedes sedan on Maple Street, hands spread on the hood, heart pounding. Officer Ryan Callahan's knee presses into his back while cold metal handcuffs bite his wrists. His daughter's apartment building looms 3 blocks away. He was just walking to surprise her with lunch. Now he's face down on scorching metal in his tailored suit, surrounded by curious onlookers with phones raised. The officer's voice cuts through the summer air. "You're under arrest for suspected vehicle theft." Samuel can't breathe. Everything he's built hangs by a thread. The morning had started with such promise. Dr. Samuel Green sat in his corner office on the 14th floor of Iridia City Hall, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling downtown district he'd helped revitalize over the past 3 years. His mahogany desk, a gift from the mayor upon his appointment, was covered with carefully organized stacks of documents: zoning proposals for the new waterfront development, budget projections for the upcoming fiscal year, and most importantly, the comprehensive police reform bill he'd been crafting for 6 months. At 52 years old, Samuel represented everything his parents had dreamed of when they'd worked the tobacco fields of North Carolina decades ago, never imagining their son would graduate from Harvard Law School, serve as a federal prosecutor for 12 years, and eventually become the first African-American city manager of Iridia, a thriving city of 150,000 people nestled in the heart of the Midwest. His assistant, Jennifer Morrison, a efficient woman in her 30s with wire-rimmed glasses, knocked softly before entering with his daily briefing folder. "Dr. Green, just a reminder that the City Council meeting is at 3 o'clock this afternoon. They'll be discussing your police reform proposal, and I expect it's going to be contentious." Samuel nodded, his mind already preparing the arguments he'd present to convince skeptical council members that mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, and implicit bias training weren't attacks on law enforcement, but necessary evolution for a modern, diverse city. He'd spent weeks meeting with community leaders, analyzing data from other municipalities, and consulting with national experts on police accountability. The proposal was solid, evidence-based, and desperately needed in a city where complaints of racial profiling had increased by 37% over the past 2 years. But first, he had a more pleasant task. His daughter Jasmine, a 27-year-old second-year medical resident at Iridia General Hospital, had been working brutal shifts all week, sometimes staying at the hospital for 36 hours straight. Samuel decided to surprise her with lunch from Bangkok Spice, the Thai restaurant near her apartment that she'd loved since her college days. He told Jennifer he'd be back by 2 o'clock, gathered his briefcase, and took the private elevator down to the underground parking garage. His black Mercedes sedan, a splurge he'd allowed himself after years of driving modest vehicles, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Samuel drove through downtown Iridia, admiring the restored historic buildings that now housed trendy boutiques and tech startups, evidence of the economic renaissance he'd helped orchestrate through strategic partnerships between city government and private developers. The gentrification concerned him, though. Rising property values were pushing longtime Black and Latino residents out of neighborhoods their families had called home for generations. It was a tension he navigated constantly, progress that benefited some while displacing others. Maple Street, where Jasmine lived, represented this transformation perfectly. Old brick apartment buildings with ivy-covered walls stood beside newly constructed lofts with rooftop gardens. Coffee shops, with $5 lattes, occupied storefronts that once held family-owned bodegas. Samuel parked his Mercedes along the tree-lined street, fed the meter with quarters, and walked 2 blocks to Bangkok Spice. The lunch rush had ended, and he was in and out within 15 minutes, carrying 2 bags filled with pad thai, green curry, spring rolls, and mango sticky rice for dessert. The summer sun beat down as he walked back, loosening his silk tie slightly. He'd always dressed impeccably for work. Tailored suits from a downtown clothier, Italian leather shoes, a platinum watch his wife had given him for their 20th anniversary. Professional appearance mattered in his position, particularly as a black man in a leadership role where every choice, every word, every gesture was scrutinized more harshly than his white predecessors had experienced. Reaching his car, Samuel used his key fob to unlock it, opened the passenger door, and carefully placed the takeout bags on the leather seat, making sure nothing would spill during the short drive to Jasmine's building. He was closing the door when he noticed two police cruisers driving slowly past, brake lights flashing red as they stopped in the middle of the street. His stomach tightened instinctively. That familiar wariness every black man learns, regardless of education or status. The cruisers reversed, parking behind his Mercedes at angles that blocked him in. Two officers emerged. The first, a stocky white man, in his mid-30s, with a crew cut and shoulders like a linebacker, had his hand resting on his service weapon. His nameplate read Callahan. The second officer, younger and leaner, followed his partner's lead. Samuel's legal training kicked in immediately. He stood still, hands visible, non-threatening posture. Officer Callahan approached, eyes hard. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." The command came sharp and loud, drawing attention from pedestrians on the sidewalk. Samuel, confused but cooperative, raised his hands and stepped back from his car. "Officer, is there a problem? This is my vehicle." Callahan moved closer, aggressive, territorial. "We received a report of a suspicious person breaking into cars in this area. That vehicle matches the description." Samuel felt disbelief wash over him, followed by a creeping, familiar dread. "I'm Dr. Samuel Green. This is my car. The registration is in the glove compartment. My license is in my wallet." But Callahan wasn't listening. His hand moved from his weapon to his handcuffs. "Turn around. Hands on the hood." Now, Samuel's heart hammered. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not to him. Not after everything he'd accomplished. "Officer, please, there's been a misunderstanding. If you just check my ID." Callahan grabbed Samuel's shoulder, spun him around forcefully, slammed him against the Mercedes. The hot metal burned through his expensive suit jacket. Samuel's face pressed sideways against the hood, his carefully knotted tie cutting into his throat. He heard the metallic click of handcuffs, felt them lock around his wrists behind his back, too tight, biting into skin. People were gathering now. Phones appeared, recording. Samuel glimpsed an elderly white woman clutching her purse, two young white men with skateboards watching wide-eyed, a black teenager frozen on the corner, and the owner of the corner market stepping outside. This was his city. These were his constituents. And they were watching him, their city manager, being treated like a common criminal. Officer Callahan's voice boomed over the scene. "You're under arrest for suspected vehicle theft." The words hit Samuel like physical blows. Everything he'd built, every achievement, every barrier he'd broken, every stereotype he'd defied, all of it threatened by this moment, this officer, this assumption that a black man with an expensive car must be a thief. Samuel Green, pressed hard against the burning hood of his own Mercedes, struggled to maintain the composure that had served him through countless tense negotiations and high-stakes legal battles. "Officer Callahan," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the humiliation coursing through him. "I'm Dr. Samuel Green. I'm the city manager of Iridia. This is my personal vehicle. My registration is in the glove compartment, and my driver's license is in my wallet. If you check either one, you'll see I'm telling you the truth." Callahan ignored him completely, speaking into his radio instead. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I have a suspect in custody on Maple Street. Requesting backup for suspected auto theft in progress. Suspect is resisting." Samuel's eyes widened. "I'm not resisting. I'm cooperating fully." But the damage was done. The second cruiser, which had been idling nearby, roared to life. Officer Derek Moss, a younger man with sandy hair and nervous energy, jumped out and jogged over. "What do we got, Callahan?" Callahan gestured at Samuel with obvious disdain. "Caught this one breaking into this Mercedes. Claims it's his car. Probably stolen, or he's using fake documentation." The small crowd on the sidewalk had grown. An elderly black man with gray hair and kind eyes, wearing a cardigan despite the summer heat, stepped forward. Samuel recognized him immediately. Theodore Harris, a retired postal worker who attended every city council meeting and had personally thanked Samuel 3 months ago for advocating for better sidewalk maintenance in his neighborhood. "That's Dr. Green," Theodore called out, his voice strong. "He's our city manager. You're making a terrible mistake. Callahan whirled toward Theodore, aggressive. Sir, step back right now. You're interfering with a police investigation. One more word and you'll be arrested for obstruction. Theodore held his ground, pulling out his phone. I'm recording this. The whole city needs to see what you're doing to this man. Other phones appeared, a dozen digital witnesses documenting every moment. Samuel, still pressed against his car, felt his suit jacket tear at the shoulder seam, heard the expensive fabric rip. His platinum watch scraped against the hood, leaving deep scratches in both the metal and the crystal face. These were material things, replaceable, but they represented something larger. His dignity being stripped away in public, his identity erased, reduced to nothing but skin color in the eyes of this officer. Officer, I'm asking respectfully. Samuel tried again, modulating his tone to remove any hint of challenge that might escalate the situation further. Please allow me to contact my office. My assistant can verify my identity. Or call City Hall directly. The main number is 555-7800. Ask for Jennifer Morrison. Callahan yanked Samuel's wallet from his back pocket, flipped it open, glanced at the driver's license without really looking, then tossed it onto the ground beside the car. Fake ID. We see these all the time. Criminals get sophisticated forgeries made. You can tell your story to the detectives downtown. Officer Moss, who had been watching the growing crowd nervously, picked up the wallet and examined the license more carefully. He walked back to his cruiser, radio in hand, and Samuel heard him speaking to dispatch. This is Unit 49. Running a vehicle registration check on a black Mercedes sedan, license plate Victor Charles Henry 4729. There was a pause, then static, then a female voice crackled over the radio. Unit 49, that vehicle is registered to Samuel Green. Residential address 847 Riverside Drive, Iridia. Moss's face registered confusion. He returned to Callahan, spoke in a low voice that Samuel could barely hear over the pounding of his own heart. Ryan, the registration checks out. It's registered to Samuel Green at an address in the Riverside district. Callahan's face hardened, jaw clenching. So what? Vehicle could be stolen. Registration could be fraudulent. Or he's using a stolen identity. Run a full background check. Samuel felt hope flickering, then dying. This officer had committed to a narrative and would bend reality to fit it rather than admit error. A young black woman in the crowd, college age with natural hair and a university sweatshirt, pushed to the front. Samuel didn't recognize her, but her face showed recognition and shock. Oh my God, that's Dr. Green. He came to speak at my political science class last semester. He's the city manager! She pulled out her phone, frantically typing. Callahan advanced on her, intimidating. Miss, I need you to step back immediately. You're interfering with police business. If you don't comply, you'll be arrested along with him. The young woman, whose name Samuel would later learn was Shanice, stood her ground but stopped approaching. She held her phone high, recording, and addressed the crowd. Everybody needs to see this. They're arresting Dr. Samuel Green, our city manager, for sitting in his own car. This is racial profiling. The murmurs grew louder. More people gathered. A Hispanic woman Samuel recognized, Rosa Delgado, who owned the corner market and whom he'd helped secure a small business loan last year, rushed inside her shop and emerged moments later with a framed newspaper clipping. She held it up, showing a photo of Samuel from an Iridia Tribune article titled City Manager Green Announces Downtown Revitalization Initiative. The photo showed Samuel in the same suit he wore now, smiling in front of City Hall. Look, Rosa shouted, pushing through the crowd. This is Dr. Green. I have his picture in my shop. He saved my business. Callahan glanced at the article but dismissed it with a wave. That could be anyone. Could be photoshopped. I deal with the real world, not newspaper articles. Samuel, maintaining control despite rage building in his chest, spoke clearly, projecting his voice toward the recording phones. My name is Dr. Samuel Green. I am the city manager of Iridia. I was appointed 3 years ago by Mayor Bill Harrison. I live at 847 Riverside Drive. My office is on the 14th floor of City Hall. My assistant is Jennifer Morrison. I am a Harvard Law School graduate and a former federal prosecutor. I was walking to visit my daughter who lives 3 blocks from here. I purchased lunch at Bangkok Spice. I returned to my legally registered vehicle, and I am now being illegally detained and falsely arrested by officers who refuse to verify information that would take 30 seconds to confirm. His words, measured and precise, carried across the street. Several people in the crowd repeated the information into their phones. Officer Moss had returned to his cruiser, and Samuel heard him on the radio again. Dispatch, can you confirm the identity of Iridia's current city manager? The female dispatcher's voice came back, clearer now. That would be Dr. Samuel Green. He's been city manager for approximately 3 years. His office is in City Hall, and his phone number on file is 555-7812. Moss looked at Callahan, face pale. Callahan's jaw worked, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He keyed his own radio. Dispatch, we need confirmation on this. Run the name again. Check for warrants, priors, anything. The dispatcher responded, professional but with an edge of confusion. Officer Callahan, I'm showing no warrants or criminal history for Samuel Green. As I stated, he's listed in city records as the current city manager. The crowd erupted. People shouted at the officers. Theodore Harris's voice rose above the rest. You hear that? Now let him go. You've humiliated this man enough. Samuel's phone, confiscated by Callahan and sitting on the cruiser's hood, began to ring. The screen lit up with the caller ID visible to everyone nearby. Mayor Harrison, direct line. Callahan looked at the phone, at Samuel, then silenced the call without answering. Samuel felt something shift inside him. This was no longer about a mistake. Callahan knew the truth now. The evidence was overwhelming. The dispatcher confirmed it. The crowd confirmed it. The mayor was calling. But Callahan couldn't back down. To admit he'd racially profiled and wrongfully arrested the city manager would end his career, open him to lawsuits, become a national news story. So he would double down, push forward, hope to find something, anything, to justify this arrest and save himself. Samuel realized with sickening clarity that he wasn't dealing with ignorance anymore. He was dealing with a man whose fear of consequences had made him dangerous. 3 blocks away, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse building, Jasmine Green was emerging from a much-needed shower after working a grueling overnight shift in the emergency room. Medical residency was everything she'd expected, and worse. The endless hours, the emotional toll of losing patients, the physical exhaustion that made her bones ache. But she loved it. Loved the moment when a diagnosis clicked into place, loved the gratitude in a patient's eyes, loved following in her father's footsteps of service even though her path was medicine rather than law. She pulled on comfortable clothes, planning to study for her upcoming boards exam, when her phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment below hers. Jasmine, dear, you need to look outside. There's police cars on the street, and I think something's wrong. It looks like they have someone against a car, and there's quite a crowd. Jasmine's first thought was annoyance at the disturbance. Her second was curiosity, and her third, after moving to her window and looking down at Maple Street, was pure terror. Even from 4 stories up, she recognized her father's Mercedes. She recognized his suit. She saw him pressed against the hood, hands behind his back, surrounded by police and onlookers. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't process what she was seeing. Then adrenaline flooded her system. She shoved her feet into sneakers, didn't bother with socks, grabbed her keys and phone, and ran. The elevator took forever. She pounded on the button repeatedly, then gave up and took the stairs, flying down 4 flights, bursting through the lobby door, and sprinting up the sidewalk. The crowd parted as she pushed through, people recognizing the desperation on her face. Dad! Jasmine's voice cracked as she reached the police line. Dad! What's happening? Samuel lifted his head from the hood, saw his daughter, and felt his heart break. She was supposed to be resting. She was supposed to be safe. Now she was seeing him like this, humiliated and helpless. Jasmine, I'm okay. There's been a misunderstanding. These officers think I stole my own car. Jasmine rounded on Callahan, her medical training in crisis management kicking in. I'm his daughter, Dr. Jasmine Green. That's my father, Dr. Samuel Green. He's the city manager. Whatever you think is happening here, you're wrong. Callahan looked her up and down, skeptical. You got ID? Jasmine pulled out her driver's license and hospital badge, hands shaking with rage and fear. Callahan examined them with deliberate slowness. How do I know you're really his daughter? You could be an accomplice trying to interfere. The crowd's anger swelled. Shouts of, "This is ridiculous," and "Let him go," echoed off the building facades. Jasmine, fighting to stay calm, pulled out her phone and began recording. I'm documenting everything. My father is a 52-year-old city official being illegally detained. He's told you who he is. Multiple witnesses have confirmed his identity. Dispatch has confirmed his identity. And you're still holding him. I want your badge numbers. I want to know who your supervisor is. And I'm calling our family attorney right now. She stepped back, keeping her phone trained on the scene, and dialed. Marcus, it's Jasmine Green. I need you at Maple Street immediately. My father's been arrested. Yes, Dad. No, he hasn't done anything. They think he stole his own car. Just get here. Traffic on Maple Street had slowed to a crawl as drivers gawked at the scene. One of those drivers was Patricia Chen, a 51-year-old city council member representing Iridia's diverse Northeast district. Patricia had been on her way to City Hall for a pre-meeting strategy session with Samuel about the police reform bill when she spotted the crowd in police cars. Then she recognized Samuel's Mercedes. Then she recognized Samuel himself, handcuffed against the hood. She pulled her Tesla to the curb, parked illegally, and marched into the fray. "Officer!" Her voice carried natural authority from decades in public service. "I'm Council Member Patricia Chen. Dr. Green and I have a meeting in 90 minutes to discuss police reform legislation. Release him immediately." Callahan turned, sizing up this new challenge. "Ma'am, this is a police matter. I need you to step back." Patricia pulled out her phone and snapped photos of Samuel's torn suit, his scratched watch, the handcuffs cutting into his wrists. "This is a civil rights violation. I'm documenting everything. Do you understand the magnitude of what you're doing? You're unlawfully detaining a senior city official based on no evidence whatsoever." Officer Moss approached Callahan, speaking urgently in his ear. Samuel couldn't hear the words, but he saw Moss gesturing at the crowd, at the phones, at the council member. Moss was young enough to recognize a career-ending disaster when he saw one. Callahan shook his head stubbornly, pushed Moss away. "We received a credible 911 call about a suspicious person breaking into vehicles matching this description in this area." The words were barely out of his mouth when the radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice came through, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Officer Callahan, I need to correct your previous statement. I show no 911 calls reporting vehicle break-ins on Maple Street today. There are no such calls in the system." The crowd erupted again. Someone yelled, "He's lying!" Others took up the chant. Callahan's face flushed red, whether from anger or embarrassment Samuel couldn't tell. Officer Moss looked like he wanted to disappear. Patricia Chen stepped closer to Samuel, positioning herself between him and Callahan. "Officer, you've just been caught in a lie on record. Multiple witnesses heard you claim a 911 call that doesn't exist. You have no legal basis for this detention. Remove those handcuffs now, or I will personally ensure that you face charges for false arrest and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Samuel's phone rang again. The screen showed Mayor Harrison, direct line for the second time. Jasmine, standing nearby, saw it and acted. "I'm answering that." She picked up the phone before Callahan could react. "Mayor Harrison? This is Jasmine Green, Dr. Green's daughter. My father has been arrested by your police department for sitting in his own car." She put the phone on speaker. Mayor Bill Harrison's voice filled the air, tight with controlled anger. "What do you mean arrested? Where is Samuel?" Jasmine's voice shook. "He's handcuffed against his car on Maple Street. Officer Callahan has ignored multiple attempts to verify his identity. Dispatch confirmed who he is. Witnesses confirmed it. Councilmember Chen is here confirming it. But he's still in handcuffs." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When the mayor spoke again, his voice had gone cold and hard. "Put Officer Callahan on the phone. Right now." Jasmine held the phone toward Callahan. "The mayor wants to speak with you." Callahan took it, walked several paces away. The crowd watched him intently. His body language shifted as he listened, shoulders tensing, then hunching. He spoke too quietly to hear, but his gestures were defensive, explanatory. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. When he returned, his face was ashen. He handed the phone back to Jasmine without looking at her. Samuel, still pressed against the car, waited for the handcuffs to come off, for an apology, for this nightmare to end. Instead, Callahan announced, "I'm still taking him to the station for questioning. There are protocols that must be followed." The crowd couldn't believe it. Neither could Patricia Chen, who immediately got back on her phone, calling someone else. Samuel felt despair wash over him. The mayor had spoken directly to this officer, and still Callahan was pushing forward. It wasn't about evidence anymore. It wasn't about truth. Callahan had gone too far to turn back. His only hope was to get Samuel to the station, somehow find something to justify the arrest, manufacture probable cause retroactively. It was the behavior Samuel had prosecuted in his federal cases, police misconduct driven by the desperate need to avoid accountability. Samuel had put cops in prison for less than what was happening to him right now. And somehow that made it worse. He knew exactly what was happening, knew the legal framework being violated, knew the civil rights being trampled, and was powerless to stop it. The standoff continued for another 10 minutes, that felt like hours to Samuel, his body pressed against hot metal, wrists aching from the tight handcuffs, suit ruined, dignity shredded in front of his constituents. Jasmine stood close by, phone still recording, tears streaming down her face despite her efforts to remain composed. Patricia Chen had moved to the edge of the crowd, phone pressed to her ear, and from the intensity of her conversation, Samuel guessed she was speaking with the city attorney. More curious onlookers had gathered, the crowd swelling to perhaps 50 people now, a mix of races and ages, united in their shock at what they were witnessing. Theodore Harris, the retired postal worker, had taken it upon himself to provide running commentary to newcomers, explaining who Samuel was and the absurdity of his arrest. "That's Dr. Samuel Green, our city manager. 3 years ago, he was appointed to turn this city around, and he's done it. Crime is down 18%, unemployment is down, new businesses opening every month. He got funding for the new community center in my neighborhood. And these officers are treating him like a criminal because they saw a black man with a nice car." The murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Samuel heard snippets of conversation, people pulling up his Wikipedia page on their phones, reading his credentials aloud, expressing outrage and disbelief. A news van rolled up, satellite dish extending from its roof. "Channel 7, Samuel recognized the logo. The side door slid open and out stepped Ashley Kim, an investigative reporter whose series on housing discrimination Samuel had praised publicly 6 months ago. Ashley took one look at the scene and immediately understood its significance. She gestured to her cameraman, and within seconds they were broadcasting live. Samuel couldn't see the camera from his position, but he heard Ashley's voice, professional and clear. "This is Ashley Kim reporting live from Maple Street in downtown Iridia, where an extraordinary situation is unfolding. Dr. Samuel Green, the city manager of Iridia, has been detained and handcuffed by police officers who apparently mistook him for a car thief. Despite multiple confirmations of his identity, Dr. Same, Green remains in custody." The crowd parted slightly to give the camera a clear shot. Samuel closed his eyes, knowing his humiliation was now being broadcast across the city, would be on social media within minutes, would probably go national within hours. His career, his reputation, his family's privacy, all of it exposed. Officer Callahan finally turned toward the growing media presence, seeming to realize for the first time how catastrophically this situation had escalated. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I need a supervisor at Maple Street immediately. We have a situation here that requires command-level response." Within 5 minutes, a police SUV arrived. Out stepped Sergeant Linda Patterson, a 43-year-old African-American woman with 20 years on the force, someone Samuel had met multiple times at community policing forums. She wore her uniform with obvious pride, her badge gleaming in the sunlight, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd earned every rank through merit and persistence. Linda took in the scene with practiced efficiency. The handcuffed man against the Mercedes, the crowd of witnesses, the news camera, the phone recordings. Her eyes widened when she recognized Samuel. "Dr. Green?" Her voice carried shock and confusion. She turned to Callahan. "What in God's name is going on here?" Callahan straightened, attempting to reassert control. "Sergeant, I responded to reports of suspicious activity in this area. This individual was observed accessing a vehicle that matched the description of a potentially stolen car. I detained him for questioning, and he's been uncooperative." Samuel, finally able to speak to someone who might listen, kept his voice level. "Sergeant Patterson, I've been entirely cooperative. I explained who I am. I told these officers where my registration and identification could be found. They refused to verify my identity through simple checks that would have taken 30 seconds. I've been handcuffed against my own car for over 20 minutes, despite multiple confirmations from dispatch, witnesses, and even the mayor." Linda Patterson's face went through several expressions: confusion, understanding, then anger. She looked at Callahan with barely controlled fury. "Officer Callahan, remove those handcuffs immediately." Callahan didn't move. "Sergeant, with all due respect, I'm following protocol for a suspected vehicle theft. If I release him without proper investigation, and he turns out to be involved in criminal activity, the liability falls on me." Linda stepped closer, voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "This is Dr. Dexter, Samuel Green. I've met him personally at least a dozen times. He is the city manager of Iridia. He is not a criminal. He is not a suspect. Remove the handcuffs now, or you'll be facing insubordination charges on top of whatever else comes out of this disaster." Callahan held her gaze, something stubborn and desperate in his eyes. "I need to verify everything conclusively before releasing anyone in custody." Linda turned to Officer Moss. "Moss, remove the handcuffs." Moss hesitated, glancing between his partner and his sergeant. "Sergeant, Linda's voice turned to steel. "That's a direct order, Officer Moss. Remove the handcuffs from Dr. Green right now." Moss took a step toward Samuel, hand reaching for his key ring, when Callahan physically moved between them. "Sergeant Patterson, if you override my arrest and this individual turns out to be a sophisticated criminal using false identification, you will take full responsibility for that failure." The crowd watched in stunned disbelief. Even the other officers looked uncomfortable. Patricia Chen, still on her phone, finished her conversation and announced to the general area, "The city attorney is reviewing options for immediate legal intervention." Linda Patterson keyed her radio. "Dispatch, I need Lieutenant Bridgewater at Maple Street immediately. We have an officer refusing direct orders." Samuel's stomach sank at the name. Lieutenant Frank Bridgewater, 51 years old, white, known throughout Iridia's black community as someone with old-school attitudes and a long history of complaints that never quite stuck. 3 excessive force allegations dismissed. 2 racial profiling complaints swept away. 1 federal investigation that mysteriously lost momentum. Bridgewater had been Callahan's training officer years ago, and rumor suggested their relationship remained close. Within 8 minutes, Bridgewater's unmarked sedan pulled up. He emerged in street clothes but with his badge clipped to his belt, off-duty but responding to his protégé's call. He assessed the scene with cold, calculating eyes, paying particular attention to the news cameras. He spoke briefly with Callahan, then with Linda Patterson, his expression never changing. Finally, he approached Samuel. "Dr. Green, I'm Lieutenant Frank Bridgewater. I understand there's been some confusion here today. In the interest of resolving this situation properly and protecting everyone's rights, I'm going to need you to accompany us to the station so we can sort everything out through proper channels." Samuel stared at him in disbelief. "Lieutenant, I've done nothing wrong. I've been illegally detained for half an hour. I've provided my identification. My identity has been confirmed by dispatch, by witnesses, by a city council member, and by the mayor himself. There is no legal basis for taking me anywhere." Bridgewater's tone remained professionally neutral, which somehow made it worse. "Sir, When there's a question about vehicle ownership and identity, standard protocol requires processing at the station. It's for your protection as much as ours. Patricia Chen pushed forward. That's absolutely not standard protocol, Lieutenant. You know it, I know it, and every lawyer watching this live stream knows it. Dr. Green has committed no crime. You have no probable cause. This is false arrest, and if you persist, the city will face a massive lawsuit. Bridgewater ignored her, focusing on Samuel. Dr. Green, will you cooperate voluntarily, or will we need to transport you in custody? Sergeant Linda Patterson looked like she wanted to physically intervene, but knew that defying a lieutenant would end her career. She stepped close to Bridgewater and spoke quietly, urgently, words Samuel couldn't hear but could guess. Warnings about lawsuits, bad publicity, career suicide. Bridgewater listened, nodded, then dismissed her concerns with a wave. The command structure was closing ranks. One bad officer might be sacrificed, but the institution would protect itself. And right now, the institution had decided that admitting fault publicly would be worse than doubling down. Samuel faced a terrible choice: resist and risk escalation, possibly violence, certainly additional charges, or comply and legitimize this injustice, allow himself to be processed like a criminal, accept the humiliation. He thought about his parents, who'd taught him to survive by being twice as good and half as threatening. He thought about his daughter, watching with horror. He thought about every young black man in Iridia who would see this video and learn that even achievement, even power, even being the city manager, wouldn't protect you from being seen as a threat. And he made his decision. Samuel Green, drawing on 30 years of legal experience and a lifetime of navigating racism, straightened as much as he could with his hands still cuffed behind his back. He turned his body toward Ashley Kim's news camera, toward the dozens of phones recording, toward the permanent digital record that would outlast any police report or official statement. My name is Dr. Samuel Green. I am 52 years old. I am a Harvard Law School graduate. I served 12 years as a federal prosecutor. For the past 3 years, I have been the city manager of Iridia. This afternoon, I parked my legally registered Mercedes sedan on Maple Street to bring lunch to my daughter, a medical resident at Iridia General Hospital. Upon returning to my vehicle with food I had purchased from Bangkok Spice Restaurant, I was confronted by Officer Ryan Callahan, who accused me of vehicle theft despite my immediate explanation of my identity. I have cooperated fully with every request. I have provided identification. Multiple witnesses, including Iridia City Council member Patricia Chen, have confirmed my identity. The police dispatcher confirmed my identity. Mayor Bill Harrison personally spoke with Officer Callahan and confirmed my identity. Despite all of this, I remain in handcuffs. I have been detained for over 30 minutes without probable cause. I am now being told I must go to the police station for processing despite having committed no crime. I want to be absolutely clear. I am exercising my constitutional rights. I will not voluntarily accompany these officers anywhere without my attorney present. If they choose to arrest me, they are doing so without cause, and I will pursue every legal remedy available. His voice remained steady, authoritative, the voice of a federal prosecutor laying out an airtight case. The crowd erupted in applause and shouts of support. Lieutenant Bridgewater's jaw tightened. "Sir, if you refuse to cooperate, we will be forced to charge you with obstruction." Samuel looked directly at him. "Lieutenant, I practiced law for 2 decades. I know exactly what constitutes obstruction, and I am not obstructing anything. I am asserting my rights. If you arrest me for that, you will be violating clearly established law, and the civil rights lawsuit that follows will be the least of your concerns." The standoff had reached its breaking point. The crowd pressed closer, their chanting growing louder. "Let him go! Let him go!" Patricia Chen positioned herself between Samuel and the officers, arms crossed. "You will not take Dr. Green anywhere. I'm calling an emergency meeting of the City Council right now." She raised her phone and began a conference call, right there on the street. "Yes, this is Council Member Chen. I'm invoking emergency session protocols. We need council members at City Hall immediately. We have a constitutional crisis in progress." More officials began arriving. Elena Rodriguez, the deputy city manager, a sharp woman in her 40s with gray streaking her dark hair, parked her car and rushed over. "Samuel, what is happening?" She listened to the brief explanation, her face darkening with fury. "These officers have lost their minds. Samuel, don't say another word without your attorney." James Morrison, Iridia's fire chief and one of only 3 black department heads, arrived next. He stood a imposing 6 feet 4 inches tall, his uniform immaculate, his presence commanding. "Dr. Green, I just heard what's happening. This is outrageous. These officers need to stand down immediately." More people kept coming. Robert Hayes, the school superintendent, alarmed by texts from parents. David Kim, who ran the Asian American Community Coalition. Reverend Thomas Jackson from First Baptist Church. Maria Gonzalez from the Latino Business Alliance. They formed a protective circle around Samuel, a human barrier between him and the police. Officer Moss looked increasingly panicked, young enough to recognize that he'd be the junior officer who lost his career over his partner's stubbornness. He pulled Callahan aside, and Samuel could see the animated conversation, Moss gesturing wildly, Callahan shaking his head with stubborn denial. Social media had exploded. Hashtags were already trending. Save Dr. Green. Iridia racial profiling. Justice for Samuel Green. The video had been shared thousands of times in minutes, picked up by regional news outlets, then national ones. CNN sent an alert. MSNBC interrupted programming. Fox News ran the footage with various talking heads already spinning narratives. The ACLU of the state tweeted a statement. National civil rights organizations issued condemnations. Local politicians began releasing carefully worded statements. All of this swirled around Samuel as he stood there, still handcuffed, his wrists now bleeding slightly where the metal had rubbed skin raw. Sergeant Linda Patterson pulled Lieutenant Bridgewater away from the scene, and their argument was visible to everyone, even if the words weren't audible. She pointed at the cameras, at the crowd, at Samuel, clearly explaining the catastrophe that was unfolding. Bridgewater listened, his face impassive, then shook his head. He was too deep into this decision to reverse course. Admitting fault now would be personal and professional destruction, so he would push forward and hope to find something, anything, to retroactively justify the arrest. 3 more news vans arrived from different stations. Iridia was a mid-sized city, but this story was big enough to pull crews from the state capital 90 miles away. Helicopters appeared overhead, getting aerial shots of the crowd, the police presence, the man in handcuffs surrounded by supporters. Jasmine had moved close to her father again, standing beside him, holding his arm despite the awkward angle of the handcuffs. "Dad, your lawyer just texted. He's 15 minutes away. Don't say anything else." Samuel nodded, grateful for her presence, devastated that she had to see him like this. A black town car pulled up, and Mayor Bill Harrison emerged, his face set in grim lines. At 61 years old, Harrison was a moderate Republican who'd won election by building coalitions across racial and economic divides. He'd hired Samuel specifically to bring progressive leadership to city management. They'd had their disagreements, Harrison being more cautious than Samuel liked, but they'd developed mutual respect. Now Harrison strode through the crowd, his presence commanding silence. He nodded at Patricia Chen, at the other city officials, then approached Lieutenant Bridgewater. "Frank, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" Bridgewater straightened. "Mayor Harrison, we're following standard procedures for a suspected vehicle theft." Harrison's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "Frank, that's the city manager in handcuffs. The man I hired, the man who reports directly to me, and the city council. There's no suspected vehicle theft. There's no probable cause. There's just racial profiling, and now you're making it infinitely worse by doubling down." He pulled Bridgewater aside, along with Callahan, and the 3 men huddled near the police cruisers. The city attorney, Linda Chen, no relation to Patricia, arrived at the same time, a fierce woman in her 40s with silver-rimmed glasses and a briefcase that probably contained enough legal firepower to destroy careers. She went immediately to Samuel, pulling out her phone and photographing every injury. The raw wrists, the torn suit jacket with its ripped shoulder seam, the scratched watch, the exhaustion and trauma visible on his face. "Dr. Green, I'm documenting everything. We're building a federal civil rights case. Don't worry, we'll handle this." The huddle near the cruisers broke up. Mayor Harrison returned, his face revealing both anger and political calculation. Lieutenant Bridgewater and Officer Callahan are suspended effective, immediately pending a full investigation. A murmur ran through the crowd, satisfaction mixed with the sense that this wasn't nearly enough. But then Callahan did something that turned the entire situation on its head. His face was twisted with rage and humiliation, his career ending before his eyes, his pension threatened, his reputation destroyed. He stalked toward Samuel's Mercedes, yanked open the driver's side door without permission or warrant, and began searching. "Officer Callahan, stop right now!" Mayor Harrison shouted. Sergeant Patterson ran toward him. "Callahan, that's an illegal search." But Callahan was beyond reason, beyond caring about legal niceties. He grabbed Samuel's briefcase from the back seat, dumped its contents onto the hood. Manila folders, legal documents, budget proposals, family photos, a book Samuel had been reading. Callahan rifled through everything with increasing desperation, looking for anything that could justify this disaster, any contraband or evidence of wrongdoing. Samuel watched, horrified and helpless, as this officer violated his property, his privacy, his constitutional rights on camera for everyone to see. Callahan threw papers aside, tore through folders, and found nothing because there was nothing to find. Finally, Sergeant Patterson physically grabbed Callahan's arm. "That's enough. You're done." Mayor Harrison's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Officer Ryan Callahan, you are under arrest for illegal search and seizure, tampering with private property, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Sergeant Patterson, take him into custody." The crowd watched in stunned amazement as two other officers, who'd been standing back throughout the incident, moved forward and handcuffed Callahan. The hunter had become the hunted. The man who'd started this by assuming a black man with a Mercedes must be a criminal was now being arrested himself while cameras rolled. And still, Samuel remained in handcuffs, and no one had yet offered him an apology. The chaos of Maple Street finally began to subside as Officer Ryan Callahan, now in handcuffs himself, was escorted to a police cruiser and driven away. His face, visible through the car window, showed a mixture of rage, disbelief, and dawning horror at what he'd done to his own life. Lieutenant Bridgewater followed in his personal vehicle, suspended but not arrested, his future uncertain but probably not including a badge much longer. Officer Derek Moss stood alone by his cruiser, looking young and lost, understanding that his career had been irrevocably damaged before it really began. Guilty by association even though he'd tried, weakly, to intervene. Sergeant Linda Patterson finally approached Samuel, key in hand. "Dr. Green, I am so deeply sorry. This should never have happened." She unlocked the handcuffs, and Samuel felt the metal release, blood rushing back to his hands. He brought his arms forward slowly, wrists screaming with pain, raw and bleeding. Jasmine immediately examined them with her medical training, gently probing for serious damage. "Dad, we need to get these treated. You're going to bruise badly, and the abrasions need cleaning." But Samuel wasn't ready to leave. He stood there on Maple Street, surrounded by supporters and cameras, and felt something crystallize inside him. This moment wasn't just about his personal violation. This was about every black person who'd experienced this same fear and humiliation, without his resources, without his position, without cameras to document their truth. Mayor Harrison approached, hand extended. "Samuel, I cannot express how sorry I am. This is not what Iridia stands for. We will make this right." Samuel looked at the offered hand, but didn't take it. "Bill, you've known me for 3 years. We've worked together on dozens of initiatives. I've sat in your office, eaten dinner at your house, advised you on sensitive matters, and yet when one of your officers decided I was a criminal based solely on my skin color, the entire system protected that assumption. Dispatch confirmed my identity. Witnesses confirmed it. You personally confirmed it. And still your lieutenant supported the arrest. The institution closed ranks to protect itself rather than admit fault." Harrison's hand dropped. "You're right. Completely right. And we're going to fix it." Samuel's voice grew stronger, addressing not just the mayor, but everyone within earshot, everyone watching on screens across the nation. I've been working on a police reform bill for 6 months. Comprehensive reforms, mandatory body cameras that can't be turned off, independent civilian oversight boards with real power, implicit bias training that actually changes behavior, community policing that builds trust, and transparent accountability when officers violate rights. Tonight, the City Council votes on that bill. And I promise you this, I will use every bit of influence I have to ensure it passes. Patricia Chen, still recording on her phone, spoke up. Dr. Green, I was undecided on some aspects of your bill. I'm not anymore. You have my yes vote. Other council members had arrived during the confrontation's climax. 2 more pledged their support on the spot. The political calculation had shifted. What had been a tough vote was now inevitable. Social media continued its frenzy. The hashtags had millions of interactions now. Politicians from both parties were weighing in. The state's 2 senators issued a joint statement calling for a federal investigation. The governor, always cautious about stepping into local matters, released a carefully worded message about the need for police accountability while supporting law enforcement. Marcus Wellington, Samuel's attorney, finally arrived, a distinguished black man in his 60s who'd built a civil rights practice over 40 years. He took one look at Samuel's wrists, his torn clothes, his exhausted face, and his own fury was palpable. Samuel, don't say another word publicly until we've talked. Mayor Harrison, City Attorney Chen, we need to discuss immediate steps. But Samuel wasn't finished. Marcus, I appreciate your counsel, but I need to say this. He turned to the cameras, to the crowd, to the permanent record. What happened to me today happens to black people across this country every single day. The only difference is that I had the privilege of position, the resources to fight back, the platform to be heard. How many others are dismissed, disbelieved, arrested, or worse, with no cameras rolling? I'm going to use what happened today to demand change, not just in Iridia, but everywhere. The crowd applauded. Reverend Jackson stepped forward and embraced Samuel carefully, mindful of his injuries. Brother, you've shown us all what dignity looks like under pressure. We're with you. Slowly, the scene began to disperse. The news crews stayed for interviews, catching reactions from community members, city officials, witnesses. Ashley Kim secured an exclusive with Samuel for her evening broadcast. Officers began removing the police tape, and traffic on Maple Street resumed its normal flow. Samuel finally retrieved his wallet from where Callahan had thrown it, his driver's license smudged with dirt. He gathered the scattered contents of his briefcase, papers crinkled and out of order. The Thai food in his car was cold and probably spoiled after sitting in the Sunday. The surprise lunch for Jasmine, the simple gesture of love that had started this nightmare, was ruined. Jasmine drove him home to the Riverside District address that Officer Callahan had dismissed as fake. It was a beautiful house, nothing ostentatious but comfortable, earned through years of government service and careful saving. Samuel's wife, Margaret, a high school principal, was waiting at the door, having rushed home from work when Jasmine called. She wrapped him in a careful hug, her own tears falling. I watched it all online. I've never been so terrified. They went inside, away from cameras and crowds, and Samuel finally allowed himself to break. The adrenaline that had sustained him for 90 minutes drained away, leaving him shaking. He sat on the couch, and Jasmine cleaned his wrists, while Margaret held ice to the bruises forming on his back from where Callahan had forced him against the car. The afternoon stretched into evening. The phone rang constantly. Well-wishers, reporters, city officials, friends from law school, his brother calling from Atlanta. Samuel ignored most of it. The city council meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock, just 3 hours away. He needed to prepare his testimony, but his body and mind were exhausted. Marcus Wellington arrived at 5:30, briefcase full of notes. Samuel, you don't have to do this tonight. The council will understand if you postpone. Samuel shook his head. No, we do this tonight. If I wait, the momentum will fade. People will forget. This is the moment where we turn pain into progress. By 6:15, Samuel had showered, changed into a fresh suit, and reviewed his notes. His wrists were bandaged, hidden beneath his dress shirt cuffs. He looked in the mirror, and saw a different person than the man who'd cheerfully driven downtown that morning. That Samuel had believed, naively perhaps, that his position protected him. This Samuel knew better. He drove to City Hall with Margaret and Jasmine, Marcus following in his own car. The building was mobbed. News crews blocked the entrance. Protesters held signs demanding justice and police accountability. Inside, the council chambers, which typically held maybe 50 people for routine votes, were packed with hundreds, overflow crowds filling hallways. Officers from the police union had come en masse, and Samuel recognized the faces. Some were good cops who genuinely wanted to do right. Others were Callahan's friends who felt threatened by reform, all of them aware that tonight's vote would reshape their profession. Samuel made his way through the crowd, accepting handshakes and words of support, ignoring hostile glares from some of the officers. He took his seat at the witness table, arranged his notes, and waited for the meeting to begin. Mayor Harrison gavelled the session to order at 7 o'clock sharp, and the packed chamber fell silent. The agenda had been rearranged to put Samuel's reform bill first. Patricia Chen would introduce it, and Samuel would provide testimony. Then the council would debate and vote. Simple process, but the implications would echo for years. As Samuel stood to approach the podium to begin his presentation, the rear doors of the chamber opened. Officer Ryan Callahan walked in. He was no longer in uniform, having been fired hours earlier, but he wasn't alone. 15 off-duty police officers flanked him, arms crossed, faces hard. They filed into the back row of seats, a show of force, an intimidation tactic. The room erupted in whispers. Security moved toward them, but Mayor Harrison waved them off. They have a right to be here if they're not disruptive. Samuel stared at the man who'd humiliated him, who'd violated his rights, who'd refused to see his humanity. Callahan stared back, defiant even in defeat. And Samuel realized that firing one officer had solved nothing. The culture that produced Callahan, that protected him even when his guilt was obvious, that sent 15 cops to intimidate a reform vote, that culture remained intact. The real battle was just beginning. Samuel turned to the council, to the cameras, to his community. Members of the council, Mr. Mayor, citizens of Iridia, thank you for allowing me to present this vital legislation. I'm going to tell you about what happened to me today, and then I'm going to explain why it keeps happening, and finally I'm going to show you how we can fix it. 7 days had passed since the incident on Maple Street, and Samuel Green sat in his corner office on the 14th floor of City Hall, afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a city he'd served faithfully and that had betrayed him so completely. The physical wounds had healed somewhat. The bruises on his back had faded from deep purple to yellow-green, the abrasions on his wrists had scabbed over, and the torn suit had been disposed of beyond repair. But the psychological wounds remained raw. Jennifer Morrison, his assistant, entered with the daily briefing folder, thicker than usual, with news clippings and updates. Green, I thought you'd want to see the latest coverage. The folder contained printouts of national news articles. The New York Times had run a front-page story. City manager's arrest exposes persistent racial profiling. The Washington Post featured an opinion piece by a prominent civil rights attorney using Samuel's case to argue for federal intervention in police reform. CNN had done a 10-minute segment featuring interviews with Samuel, Mayor Harrison, and surprisingly, Officer Derek Moss, who'd given an emotional on-camera confession about his failure to stop his partner. MSNBC's morning show had discussed the incident for an entire hour with a panel of experts. Even Fox News, typically defensive of police, had split coverage, with some hosts defending Callahan, while others acknowledged the obvious injustice. Officer Ryan Callahan had been not just fired but arrested. He faced multiple charges: false arrest, illegal search and seizure, violation of civil rights under color of law, and misconduct. His bail was set at $20,000, which the police union initially refused to pay, a rare moment of institutional accountability. Lieutenant Frank Bridgewater had resigned before he could be formally terminated, taking his pension but losing his reputation. 3 other officers from his unit were under investigation for past complaints that were being re-examined in light of the new scrutiny. The Iridia Police Department was undergoing a complete review by an independent commission appointed by the mayor. But Samuel took no satisfaction in these outcomes. Punishment of individual officers didn't address the systemic problem. That required the reform bill he'd fought for, and that battle had been won. The city council had voted 7-2 in favor of his comprehensive police reform package. The 2 dissenting votes came from conservative members representing wealthy districts where police misconduct rarely touched residents' lives. But 5 members voted yes enthusiastically, including Rebecca Walsh, whose surprise speech had moved the chamber to tears. The reforms would be implemented over the next 6 months. Body cameras for all patrol officers, with footage automatically uploaded to a cloud server beyond police control. An independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power, and the authority to recommend discipline mandatory implicit bias training, developed by national experts rather than in-house. Community policing initiatives that required officers to work regular shifts in the neighborhoods they served, and a transparent complaint process where every allegation would be publicly tracked from initial report through final resolution. It was exactly what Samuel had proposed, passed without amendment. Victory should have felt sweet. Instead, Samuel felt hollowed out. Jennifer left the folder and exited quietly, sensing his mood. Samuel turned to his window, watching Iridia's streets below. The afternoon traffic, the pedestrians going about their lives. How many of them had experienced what he'd experienced? How many had stories that never made the news? His intercom buzzed. "Dr. Green, Mayor Harrison is here to see you." Samuel sighed. "Send him in." Bill Harrison entered, closing the door behind him. They'd spoken several times since the incident. Conversations that were professional but strained. The easy camaraderie they'd developed over 3 years had been damaged, maybe irreparably. "Samuel, how are you holding up?" Harrison took the chair across from Samuel's desk without waiting for invitation. "I'm managing, Bill." Harrison leaned forward. "Look, I know things have been awkward between us, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making sure the reforms are implemented properly. I'm appointing you to chair the Oversight Commission personally." Samuel shook his head. "That's not necessary. Patricia Chen would do an excellent job." Harrison looked confused. "I thought you'd want to see this through." Samuel had been wrestling with a decision all week, and Harrison's visit forced him to articulate thoughts that had been forming in the quiet moments. "Bill, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I've accomplished here in Iridia. Crime reduction, economic development, community programs, all of it real and meaningful. But what happened on Maple Street showed me something. No matter what I achieve, no matter what position I hold, I'm still seen as a threat by some people in uniform. My credentials didn't matter. My position didn't matter. My character didn't matter. Only my skin color mattered." Harrison started to protest, but Samuel raised a hand. "I'm not blaming you personally. You responded appropriately once you understood the situation. But the system, the institution, it failed. And the truth is, I can't keep working in a city where my authority is so easily dismissed when it conflicts with racial assumptions." Harrison's face paled. "Samuel, please don't tell me you're resigning. We need you now more than ever." Samuel turned back to the window. "I'm not sure yet. I've had calls this week from organizations across the country. Civil rights groups, think tanks, universities. They want me to speak, to consult, to lead national efforts on police reform." Jasmine had visited every day that week, checking on his injuries but also talking through his options. She'd revealed something that had shaken Samuel deeply. Since the video went viral, she'd received threatening messages at the hospital from supporters of Officer Callahan, people who believed their friend and colleague had been railroaded by political correctness. "Your father got what he deserved," one message read. "Maybe next time you'll both learn your place." The hospital administration had taken it seriously, increasing security, but the fact remained. Even in victory, there were consequences. That evening, Samuel drove home to Riverside Drive, his Mercedes now a reminder of trauma rather than accomplishment. Margaret had prepared dinner, but neither of them had much appetite. They sat on their back deck, watching the sun set over the city, and talked about futures they'd never previously considered. "We could move," Margaret said quietly. "Start over somewhere new. You could teach, write, Do policy work. Samuel shook his head. Running away doesn't solve anything. Margaret took his hand. It's not running away. It's choosing to fight the battle from a position where you can do the most good. You've given Iridia 3 good years. Maybe your impact needs to be national now. The argument had merit, but Samuel wasn't ready to decide. The city council meeting had taken place at 7 o'clock that night, 1 week ago. Now, at 7 o'clock on this quieter evening, Samuel's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him click accept. Dr. Green, my name is Angela Mitchell. I'm the director of the Justice Reform Alliance, a national nonprofit focused on police accountability and criminal justice reform. I'd like to discuss a position with our organization. They talked for an hour. The Justice Reform Alliance had been working on police reform for 15 years, operating in 40 states, with a staff of 200 and a budget of $30 million annually. They needed a new executive director, someone with legal expertise, government experience, and personal understanding of police misconduct. The position would be based in Washington, D.C., with extensive travel for speeches, consultations, and media appearances. The salary was substantial, comparable to what Samuel earned as city manager. But more importantly, the platform was national. He could influence policy across the country, work with Congress on federal legislation, support local activists in cities dealing with their own versions of Callahan and Bridgewater. When the call ended, Samuel sat in silence. Margaret had listened to his side of the conversation, reading between the lines. You're considering it. Samuel nodded slowly. What happened to me is my story, but it's also everyone's story. Every black person who's been profiled, stopped, searched, arrested, beaten, or killed because someone with a badge saw them as a threat rather than a person. If I stay in Iridia, I can help one city. If I take this position, maybe I can help change the whole system. The decision wasn't made that night, but the direction was becoming clear. Over the weekend, Samuel walked through Iridia's neighborhoods, visiting the community center he'd championed in the predominantly black southeast side, the new business incubator downtown that had created 300 jobs, the renovated library system that now offered technology training for seniors. He'd made a real difference here. But Maple Street was also part of his legacy now, a reminder that progress was fragile and incomplete. On Monday morning, Samuel called Angela Mitchell and asked for more time. He needed to attend the next city council meeting, needed to see his reform bill officially signed into law, needed to ensure the transition wouldn't leave his staff vulnerable. She agreed to wait 2 weeks for his decision. That evening, Jasmine came over for dinner. She'd been dealing with her own fallout from the incident, the threatening messages, the awkward conversations with colleagues, the way some attendings at the hospital looked at her differently now. Over Margaret's pot roast, Jasmine made her own announcement. Dad, I've been thinking. What happened to you? What I saw? It's changed how I think about medicine. I've been treating injuries and illnesses, but I haven't been addressing the root causes of trauma in our community. There's a fellowship at Johns Hopkins focused on medical advocacy for victims of police violence, studying the health impacts of systemic racism, training doctors to recognize and document abuse. I'm going to apply. Samuel looked at his daughter, brilliant and compassionate, and felt pride mixed with sadness that she had to redirect her career because of injustice. Jasmine, you don't have to change your path because of what happened to me. She shook her head firmly. I'm not changing my path. I'm finding my path, just like you're finding yours. The word struck deep. Samuel had spent 3 years implementing someone else's vision for Iridia, working within constraints set by a city council and mayor who meant well but didn't fully understand the urgency of racial justice. Maybe it was time to pursue his own vision, on his own terms, at a scale that matched the scope of the problem. 2 weeks passed, in a blur of meetings and decisions. The city council formally signed the police reform bill into law in a ceremony that Samuel attended but didn't speak at, letting Patricia Chen take the spotlight. The Civilian Oversight Board was established, with Chen as chair and a diverse membership representing Iridia's communities. The police department announced a recruitment initiative specifically targeting minority officers and began the process of implementing body cameras. Officer Callahan's trial was scheduled for 6 months out. Lieutenant Bridgewater had left the state, taking a security job with a private company. Officer Derek Moss, surprisingly, had become an advocate for reform within the department, speaking at roll calls about his experience and urging his colleagues to embrace change rather than resist it. And Samuel made his decision. The city council chamber was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different from that tense night 2 weeks earlier when officers had stood in intimidation at the back. Tonight, the crowd was celebratory, gathered to witness the official signing of the police reform bill into law and to honor Dr. Samuel Green for his leadership. Mayor Bill Harrison stood at the podium, with the city council arrayed behind him on their raised dais. Tonight, we take a historic step forward for Iridia. The Comprehensive Police Reform and Community Trust Act represents the most significant overhaul of law enforcement practices in our city's history. This legislation, crafted by Dr. Samuel Green, will ensure accountability, transparency, and justice for all our residents. The crowd applauded. Samuel sat in the front row, Margaret on one side, Jasmine on the other, Marcus Wellington nearby. Camera flashes popped as the council members took turns speaking in support of the reforms. Patricia Chen gave an eloquent speech about the importance of listening to marginalized voices and having the courage to change broken systems. Even the two council members who'd voted against the bill spoke respectfully about the democratic process and their commitment to implementing the law despite their reservations. When it came time for Samuel to approach the podium for remarks, the applause was thunderous and sustained. He stood before the microphone, looking out at a chamber full of people who'd supported him through the worst week of his professional life. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, and citizens of Iridia. 2 weeks ago, I stood here as a victim of racial profiling and police misconduct. Tonight, I stand here as someone who's witnessed the power of community action and democratic change. The reforms we're implementing tonight are necessary, overdue, and comprehensive. They will make Iridia safer and more just for everyone. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. But I have an announcement that many of you won't expect. After considerable thought and consultation with my family, I've decided to accept a position as Executive Director of the Justice Reform Alliance, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to police accountability and criminal justice reform. This will be my last month as city manager of Iridia. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Mayor Harrison's face registered shock. Clearly, Samuel hadn't given him advance warning. Margaret squeezed his hand. Jasmine smiled with pride and tears. Samuel continued, his voice steady. Some will see this as running away from a fight. I see it differently. What happened to me on Maple Street happens to black people, brown people, poor people across this country every single day. Most don't have the resources I had, the position I held, the platform to be heard. The reforms we've enacted in Iridia can be a model for cities nationwide, but only if someone carries that message beyond our borders. That someone needs to be me. He explained his new role, working with Congress on federal legislation, supporting grassroots activists in cities facing their own police accountability crises, providing expert testimony in civil rights cases, training police departments willing to embrace reform, and building coalitions across racial and political divides. My experience as city manager taught me how to navigate government bureaucracy. My experience as a federal prosecutor taught me how to build airtight legal cases. And my experience on Maple Street taught me what it feels like to be powerless in the face of institutional racism. I'll use all of that to fight for change at the highest levels. The speech lasted 15 minutes, outlining his vision for the Justice Reform Alliance's future and his gratitude to Iridia for the opportunity to serve. When he finished, the standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. People were crying. Mayor Harrison approached, and this time Samuel shook his hand. They spoke briefly, too quietly for the microphones to catch, words of mutual respect despite the complicated emotions. But Samuel wasn't finished with his evening. After the ceremony, after the photos and handshakes and well wishes, as the crowd filtered out of City Hall into the cool night air, Samuel noticed a figure waiting by the main doors. Officer Derek Moss, still in uniform, standing alone, looking nervous and young. Samuel approached him, and Moss straightened. "Doctor Green, I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say something." Samuel waited, curious. Moss pulled something from his pocket. His police badge. "I've been thinking about this constantly for 2 weeks. What I did, what I didn't do, how I stood by while my partner violated your rights. I can't be a cop anymore. I can't be part of a system that does this to people." He held out the badge, offering it to Samuel. "I heard about your new position. I want to help your organization. I want to train officers the right way. Show them what not to do from someone who made every mistake." Samuel looked at the young officer, saw genuine remorse in his eyes, genuine desire for redemption. He understood the gesture and what it cost Moss to make it. But he didn't take the badge. "Officer Moss, I appreciate your courage in coming here tonight, but I don't want you to quit." Moss looked confused. "Sir?" Samuel chose his words carefully. "The easiest thing for you to do is walk away, start over, tell yourself you're making a difference from outside the system. But that's not where change really happens. Change happens when good people stay inside broken institutions and fix them from within. That's harder. That's uncomfortable. That's lonely. But that's what we need." He gestured back toward City Hall. "This police department is about to undergo massive transformation. Body cameras, oversight boards, new training, community policing. Someone needs to be on the inside, implementing those reforms, modeling good behavior, pushing back against the old guard who'll resist every step. You're young enough to have a 30-year career ahead of you. You could rise through the ranks. You could be the chief someday, the one who ensures Callahan is the last officer to do what he did." Moss's eyes widened at the possibility. "You want me to stay? After what I did?" Samuel put a hand on the young officer's shoulder. "I want you to stay because of what you did. You made mistakes, and you're owning them. That's the first step toward being better. Stay. Be the change from inside. That's harder, but that's what we need." Moss looked down at his badge, then back at Samuel. Slowly, he nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "I won't let you down, sir. I promise." They shook hands, and Samuel watched as Moss walked to his patrol car and drove away, still wearing the badge, still part of the system, but committed now to being part of the solution. Margaret and Jasmine emerged from City Hall and found Samuel standing alone in the parking lot. "Dad, that was incredible. What you said to that officer." Samuel smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in 2 weeks. One officer can't change a department, but one officer who understands what went wrong, who's committed to doing better, who has 30 years to work his way up, that might matter. They walked to Samuel's Mercedes, the car that had become the symbol of everything wrong and everything possible. He'd thought about selling it, buying something less flashy, something that wouldn't attract unwanted attention. But Margaret had talked him out of it. "You earned that car. You deserve to drive it without fear. Don't let them take that from you." As Samuel drove his family home to Riverside Drive, he passed Maple Street. The corner looked ordinary now. No police cars, no crowds, no cameras. Just a tree-lined street in a gentrifying neighborhood where something terrible had happened and something transformative had begun. His phone buzzed with a text from Angela Mitchell. "The Justice Reform Alliance welcomes you officially. We're ready to change the country together." Samuel pulled into his driveway, looking at the house he'd bought with Margaret 15 years ago, where they'd raised Jasmine, where they'd built a life. In 30 days, they'd leave Iridia behind, packing up memories and heading to Washington, D.C., to start a new chapter. But tonight, he was home. Tonight, he was surrounded by family. Tonight, he could rest, knowing that the humiliation of Maple Street had been transformed into purpose, that Officer Callahan's attempt to break him had instead launched a movement. The doorbell rang an hour later. Samuel answered to find Theodore Harris, the elderly postal worker who'd been the first to defend him, standing on the porch with a gift-wrapped package. "Dr. Green, I won't keep you long. The neighborhood wanted to give you something before you leave." Samuel invited him in, and Theodore explained that the residents of Maple Street had taken up a collection. Inside the package was a framed proclamation, signed by 63 neighbors of different races and backgrounds, declaring that stretch of Maple Street would unofficially be known as Justice Corner in honor of what had transpired there. "We want people to remember," Theodore said simply. "Not just the injustice, but how the community responded, how you transformed pain into progress." Samuel hung the frame in his home office, where it would eventually move with him to Washington, a reminder of where the work began and why it mattered. The farewell ceremony took place on Samuel Green's last day as city manager, 30 days after the incident that had changed everything. City Hall's main conference room was packed with staff members, city officials, community leaders, and residents who'd come to say goodbye. Jennifer Morrison had organized everything perfectly, arranging photos from Samuel's 3 years of service on a display board. The downtown revitalization groundbreaking, the new community center ribbon cutting, youth programs he'd funded, partnerships with businesses he'd negotiated, evidence of real accomplishment, though all of it was now overshadowed by 88 seconds of video from Maple Street. Mayor Bill Harrison gave remarks praising Samuel's leadership and vision. Patricia Chen presented a resolution from the city council honoring his service. James Morrison, the fire chief, spoke movingly about Samuel's integrity and courage. But the most powerful moment came when Rebecca Walsh, the swing vote council member who'd revealed her own family's trauma to support the reform bill, approached the microphone. "I need to share something that happened yesterday," Rebecca began, her voice steady but emotional. "My son Brian, who's 27 and biracial, was driving home from work late at night. He was pulled over for a broken taillight, something minor. But instead of approaching it the way stops used to go in Iridia, before the reforms, the officer who pulled him over was wearing a body camera that he announced immediately. The officer was respectful, professional, and quick. He gave Brian a warning and sent him on his way. Brian called me in tears afterward, not because something bad happened, but because for the first time in his life, he wasn't terrified during a traffic stop. That's because of you, Dr. Green. That's because of what you suffered and what you built from that suffering. My family will be forever grateful." The applause was thunderous. Samuel wiped his eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that the reforms were already making a difference, already changing lives, already creating the safer and more just city he'd envisioned. When Samuel took the microphone for his final remarks, he spoke not as a politician or bureaucrat, but as a man who'd been broken and rebuilt. 31 days ago, I was handcuffed against my own car, treated like a criminal, my dignity stripped away in public. It was the worst experience of my professional life, but it led to the most important work of my professional life. He explained that the Justice Reform Alliance had already identified Iridia's reforms as a model to replicate in 20 other cities. He'd be testifying before Congress in 6 weeks about federal police accountability legislation. He'd been invited to speak at law schools, police academies, and community organizations across the country. What Officer Callahan intended to be my humiliation became my purpose. What was meant to silence me amplified my voice, and what happened on one street in one city is now sparking change from coast to coast. Samuel thanked his staff, his family, the community members who'd supported him. He acknowledged the difficulty of the work ahead, the resistance that would come from those who benefited from the status quo, the long road toward justice that America still had to travel. Change is slow and hard and incomplete. The reforms we've enacted here are necessary but not sufficient. We'll need to keep fighting, keep pushing, keep refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. But nights like this, moments like Rebecca's son experiencing respect instead of fear during a traffic stop, those are the signs that we're moving in the right direction. As the ceremony ended and people lined up to shake his hand one last time, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt since before Maple Street. Hope. Not naive hope that racism would magically disappear, but grounded hope that systems could change, that institutions could be reformed, that the arc of history could be bent toward justice through persistent effort. The next morning, Samuel, Margaret, and Jasmine loaded the moving truck. They'd sold the house on Riverside Drive, and the new owners, a young black family, were moving in next week. Samuel gave them a tour, showed them the good restaurants in the neighborhood, welcomed them to Iridia. As he drove out of the city for the last time, Samuel took a detour past Maple Street. The corner looked the same, peaceful, and ordinary. Cars parked along the curb, people walking dogs, children playing in a nearby park. No evidence of the transformation that had begun there. But Samuel knew the truth. Revolutions don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they start with one person refusing to accept injustice, one community demanding accountability, one moment of courage that ripples outward in ways no one could predict. 3 months later, Samuel stood in a Senate hearing room in Washington, testifying before the Judiciary Committee about the need for federal police reform legislation. The hearing was broadcast on C-SPAN and covered by major networks. Senators from both parties asked him questions, some supportive, some skeptical, all aware that the man sitting before them represented something larger than himself. Officer Ryan Callahan's trial had taken place the week before. He'd been convicted on 3 counts: false arrest, illegal search, and civil rights violations. He received a sentence of 18 months in prison, likely to serve 12 with good behavior. It was a rare outcome, an officer actually held accountable, and it sent shockwaves through law enforcement nationwide. Lieutenant Bridgewater had been hired by a security firm in another state, but lasted only 6 weeks before being fired when his history came to light. Officer Derek Moss had been promoted to training officer, the youngest in Iridia Police Department history, and was developing a curriculum on constitutional policing and implicit bias. And Jasmine Green had begun her fellowship at Johns Hopkins, studying the health impacts of police violence and training emergency room doctors to document and report abuse. The Green family story became a case study in criminal justice courses, a teaching tool in police academies, a rallying cry for activists. The video from Maple Street had been viewed over 50 million times. Samuel received speaking invitations from around the world. His personal pain had become public property, but he'd made peace with that because the pain was serving a purpose. On the 6-month anniversary of his arrest, Samuel was in Chicago, consulting with community leaders about implementing Iridia-style reforms in their city. His phone buzzed with a notification, a news alert about a new poll showing that 73% of Americans now supported mandatory body cameras for police officers, up from 48% 6 months earlier. Public opinion was shifting. The Overton window was moving. Change was possible. That evening, Samuel video called Margaret and Jasmine. They talked about their days, shared small victories and frustrations, maintained connection across distance. Before ending the call, Jasmine said something that stayed with Samuel through the night. "Dad, I've been thinking about Maple Street a lot, about how the worst moment of your life became your greatest purpose. I think that's what resilience really means. Not bouncing back to who you were before, but using the breaking to become someone stronger, someone with a mission." Samuel thought about Officer Callahan sometimes, wondered if he understood what he'd set in motion when he decided that a black man with a Mercedes must be a criminal. Probably not. People who act from prejudice rarely see the ripples their actions create. But those ripples were spreading across America now, touching communities far from Iridia, inspiring others to demand better, to refuse acceptance of systemic injustice, to transform their own pain into purpose. The work would never be finished. Racism was too deeply embedded, too profitable for some, too comfortable for others. But the work was moving forward, one body camera at a time, one oversight board at a time, one officer like Derek Moss choosing to be better at a time. And Samuel Green, who'd started that summer morning just wanting to bring his daughter lunch, had become a symbol of both what remained broken in America and what was possible when broken people refused to stay broken. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you know ever experienced racial profiling or discrimination? How did you respond? What do you think needs to change in our justice system to prevent incidents like Dr. Green's from happening? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. This conversation is crucial, and your voice matters. If this story moved you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about justice, resilience, and the ongoing fight for equality in America. And please share this video with your friends, family, and community. The more people who understand what's at stake, the faster we can create real change. Together, we can ensure that Dr. Green's experience on Maple Street becomes a turning point not just for Iridia, but for our entire nation. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being part of the solution. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and never stop demanding justice.